Hello, welcome. My name is Manuel Roman Lacayo. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Pittsburgh. It is my pleasure to have among us in presenting the call of the Sirirí, Birds, Humans, and Sound in Post-Agreement Colombia, Dr. Juan Fernando Velázquez, who is a postdoctoral scholar at the Michigan Society of Fellows, and he's an assistant professor in the Department of Musicology in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He also has a PhD in musicology with, of course, a certificate in Latin American Studies from the University of Pittsburgh. And he has a master's in musicology from the University of EPIT in Medellin, Colombia. It is really a great privilege to have him join us for this online event. And in order to make him the center of the presentation, I will be turning off, as I suggest everybody does, our video feed so that we can pay our full attention to Juan Fe. So without further ado, Juan Fernando Velázquez, you're welcome to come on. Thank you.
Thank you for the warm welcoming, Manuel. It is really nice to see you again, and thank you everyone for being here today. Before beginning this presentation, I want to express my gratitude, first of all, to the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Pittsburgh for this wonderful invitation, as well to my colleagues in the Society of Fellows at the University of Michigan. The contribution of their comments, talks, ideas, the kind of intellectual interchange has a significant influence in the work that I am presenting here today, as well as the conversation with other colleagues like Rachel Mundi, Ana Maria Ochoa, Beatriz Guert, and among others. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for all your openness to dialogue and having the opportunity to interchange ideas. Today, I'm going to talk about a bird. It is a bird that is near to 8 inches long. His head is pale gray with the contrasting darker cheeks and a bright yellow lower breast. And nothing seems exceptional in this bird, apparently. However, it's a common presence for many of us who grew up in Colombia. It's a bird that is highly resilient and lives close to urban areas. It's not strange to see this bird chasing and hunting insects, chasing them from wires, trees, and often quite visible. And suddenly, in my childhood, I learned to recognize his song. This bird is a Sirirí. That's the name. The scientific name is Tyrannus melancholicus. And this is the call of the Sirirí. The call of the Sirirí was a keynote sound in the city where I was growing for several reasons. But one of these reasons is a quite singular characteristic of the behavior of this bird. It's a bird that defends his territory in a quite aggressive way, especially during the nesting season. And it even dares to attack bigger birds. For instance, hawks, as this video shows. Watching several times this behavior, the Sirirí becomes an interesting part of the soundscape as well as the landscape. It also calls your attention and at some extent is a part of the memory that you carry on your childhood. And probably it's an experience that many Colombians have, and it's an experience that also is transmitted to the cultural field in different ways that we're going to discuss today. However, after several years in the US, the Sirirí was basically a faded memory. It wasn't in my mind, or I thought that it wasn't, until I listened one piece by the composer and sound artist Ana Maria Romano. The piece is El Suelo desde el Viento. We're going to listen to that piece later. Romano is probably one of the most influential sonic artists in Colombia today. She teaches an institution in high education institution in Bogota, but also she is director of the festival in Tiempo Real, which is one of the main festivals that convokes sonic artists from Latin America, and it's a prominent figure. And then in this piece, I listened the Sirirí call again. What is amazing about that is that it's not a sound that is relevant, but for some reason it removed a lot of these memories of my childhood in Colombia. Those afternoons, looking this little bird attacking other birds that they enter to their territory, as well as a series of connotations, cultural connotations. Days later, a friend sent me a video in the middle of the strike, the national strike on December, and I received a video of the song by Edson Belandia called El Cli 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 del Paro. It was a song that my friend and I associate with this connotation, this cultural connotation of the Sirirí as a symbol of resistance and as a symbol of persistence. What is interesting, as we will notice later, is that Belandia, when Belandia was creating this song, the bird wasn't directly on his mind. However, the symbolic representation of the call as a symbol of resistance was. All this reflection is made in a framework that I want to introduce before entering in the analysis directly, and is the post-agreement era. I use the term post-agreement rather than post-conflict for several reasons. One is to express that it is a period that follows the signature of the peace agreement, but not necessarily is a peaceful time. It's not the end of the conflict, as demonstrated by the ongoing violence, violence that unfortunately is targeting social leaders and environmental leaders in a quite dramatic way, as well as former combatants of the FARC-EP. Just to consider this, according to In the Past, a report published at the end of 2019, between November of 2016, when the peace agreement was signed, and July of 2019, 623 social and environmental leaders were killed in Colombia. Then we are talking about an era that is charged of deep contradictions. We have this ongoing violence, but at the same time, you can notice that many areas that before were closed to international tourism are now open. And it is a aim of the government to try to include, following the peace agreement, at least in the narratives, try to include them in policies of development and inclusion. Now, knowing that, I will introduce a two-part analysis. And the first part, I will direct my attention to birding. Birding basically is a new branch of ecotourism centered on bird watching tourism. As we will see later, it's quite active. It is especially attracting tourism from the global north to the global south. then it also is a process that implies an unequal circulation of people and capital. And the analysis will spin around, we will talk about how birding implies collection of data, economic development, and of course, an economy of commodification of biodiversity, and particularly avian diversity. Then, in the second section, I will return to this phenomenon of what means to listening to the Sirirí. And I will introduce an epistemological analysis following the model proposed by Stephen Feld, but also adding some extra concepts taken from animal studies and ecology and anthropology. Then, in this first section, I want to talk with you about how birding implies the production of knowledge and how it has been inserted in the logic of economic development within this post-agreement era in Colombia. After listening to Romano piece, I shared the piece with a colleague who lives in Arizona and is what I will call a serious birder. I tried to challenge her to identify some birds that are present in the soundscape that presents Romano, and she easily identified two. One is the spectacled parrotlet, and the other one is the great kiskadee. The great kiskadee is quite similar to the Sirirí, but they are different species, and the calls are completely different. However, she didn't recognize the Sirirí, and at some extent was completely the opposite of my experience. The first bird that caught my attention in the soundscape was the Sirirí. I asked her why, you have been in Colombia. She traveled a couple of times there to do bird watching tourism. And she told me, I love to watch these colorful birds, but I'm more interested, in parrots, parrotlets, colorful birds, hummingbirds, endemic species. And of course, I have seen a couple of times living in Arizona the kiskadee, but the Sirirí didn't call my attention at all. Because it's a bird that you can see easily around, and it's not as rare or colorful as the birds that I really like. That caught my attention powerfully. And one question that resonated in my mind was how we establish value to these non-human beings around us. How the habitats that we have inform that decision. How the relationship that we have informs that decision, how we construct the relation with these non-human beings around us based on familiarity or resilience. Basically, my friend was what I will call an American birder. Is also a model of birding and a consumer for this industry that I mentioned before, avitourism. According to a study by Cordell and Herbert made in 2002, the demographic of the American birder is easy to define, mostly white, a middle-aged woman, not necessarily with college education, but with high school education, living in suburban areas and around big cities and quite comfortable places, or affluent neighborhoods with an average income that projected today will be between $20,500 and $72,000 and $4,500. However, when I started to search the programs and the avitourism activities promoted in Colombia during the post-agreement era, I increasingly found that many activities are not necessarily targeting that audience. They are also promoting bird watching as an ecotourism and adventure tourism. And that is related with a recent shift in the demographics of this population consumers that we can trace in different places in the global north, not just in the US. For instance, a 2017 nationwide survey on breathing hobbies and interests revealed that 32% of British men average of hours is even higher than other activities like hiking or going outdoors and camping. In Canada, even there are festivals in which these new millennial and hipster birders, as many people define them, promotes birding actively and consciousness about birding. Let's watch this short video.
I started out when I was a little kid, so it was for fun, of course, and it still is fun, but one of my big goals is to raise conservation awareness for species that are vulnerable, such as the bearded vulture and the Philippine eagle, which is critically endangered.
Okay, good. Bye. The event has barely started and we're already having an amazing time. I couldn't be happier that we're actually able to participate in this specific way. It's amazing to see everybody's reaction to you.
We have a crowd here already just standing here as we do an interview. Obviously, it reaches out to people. People love interacting with things like a mascot or a costume.
Then we can notice here some characteristics of this population that I'm going to underline later. But one of that characteristic is definitely they are really interested into seeing and listen to endangered species and rare species. And that means that many of these species live in the global south, and particularly in areas that are considered as pristine natural areas. In addition to that, there is a whole movement involving birders and birders as helpers of ornithologists and scientists studying environmental issues as well as birds. Probably one of the most successful platforms doing that and gathering this data is eBird. eBird was developed in 2002 by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, as well working together with the Audubon National Society. It is an app that you can download in your phone, and when you are watching birds, even if you are just walking around, you can take pictures, videos, or audios. All this information is collected through the app. You complete a list, and it's information that is used later. Of course, that also includes audio. For instance, this is an spectrogram of a red-bellied grackle, which is an endemic species that lives in Colombia. Then there's a lot of data that is collected. It's not just an issue of traveling, it's also an issue of production of knowledge that is, I must confess, highly unbalanced. Is knowledge that is collected in regions of the global south, many times by local birders, but all this information is processed in the global north by institutions like the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. However, the contribution of this opportunistic data, as is known, is significant. Especially during the last decade, we have seen a huge number of studies doing with this material, using analysis of big data to explore patterns of migration of certain species, populations, and particularly endangered species in Central and South America. Now, it's not just about tourism. As I mentioned before, the average birder, as is known, a lover of bird watchers, is interested in a series of issues, especially if they are coming from the global north. In a recent article by Neil Sink, we can notice some of those characteristics. For instance, one issue is they are really interested in to visit places that have a significant number of species. Is related with biological diversity and particularly avian diversity. That's a plus of any avitouristic destination. This also should be exotic destinations. That means that there is an interest in to visit places that offer untouched nature. And that in part explains why my friend wasn't as interested in the Sirirí as I was. The Sirirí is basically a species that lives around humans. It's quite resilient and doesn't have any trouble living around us unless that, there's a terrible intervention on the space, on the ecosystem. Also, birders are collectors of memories. Indeed, the role of collector has been documented by researchers like Rachel Mundy, who explain the role of collectors in the process of creating a whole knowledge about birds. In the period that she's studying, of course, the early 20th century, late 19th century, is basically focused on create holotypes of a species, which means that they are dealing with dead bodies. Birders are collectors of memories. They catch the bird as a picture, as a video, as an audio. Those memories are introduced to something that is called the live list, which is the main goal of any serious birder is to create a live list as complete as possible. Of course, in this live list, the value of the species is marked by his rarity, his uniqueness. That means that also exotic destinations that have a considerable avian diversity, but also a significant number of endemic species are really attractive. And that's the case of Colombia. Colombia has around 1,932 species with high ratios of endemism in the different regions, and even close to big cities like Medellin and Bogota. You can find endemic species easily. And of course, birding seems to be a visually oriented activity, but in places like Colombia and tropical areas, due to the landscape and the forest, and how is the forest, it is aurally dependent, which brings a lot of problems, particularly around some practices like playback, because playback is used to attract birds to areas where birders can watch them, but also is disturbing the behavior of these birds. Unfortunately, the data that we have about that is scarce, but some studies suggest that playing the calls of the birds to attract them indeed stress some species and disrupt patterns of behavior in many of them. However, and despite that, usually birders consider that they are doing an activity that is eco-friendly. The narrative of birding and promoting birding as a form of ecotourism is that as birders are interested in these exotic and touched destinations, and they are interested in what's avian diversity, that encourages people who live in these areas to preserve their nature. And birders are also tourists, what means that they produce income in these areas, and this income also encourages the people in these areas to be involved in preservation, to create reservations, private natural reserves, and facilitates that. The issue here is that unfortunately there are some aspects of birding that are not mentioned, as we will see later. For instance, it is not mentioned the carbon footprint that has a travel from Europe or the US to places in the global south. It is not mentioned the impact that could have the construction of hotels and lodges in these places, especially in ecosystems that are quite delicate. Unfortunately, we have terrible examples about what happened with places like Escarcet in the Ribera Maya and the destruction of the coral reef. We don't know if the same can happen in cloud forest in Colombia or the Paramos, which are quite fragile ecosystems. Also, it is not clear how many birders would visit a place at once. Massive ecotourism can be really, really dangerous and can have a really harmful impact in these areas, as demonstrated by the destruction of places like the bays used in the film The Beach in Thailand. Then are issues that we should consider. Another issue is the construction of trails and has an impact in the environment. And in some cases, some practices to attract local birds, as the use of playback that I mentioned before, and the use of and the construction of feeding areas also has an impact in these populations that it is not well known yet, but for sure there's an impact. Then there's a dark side of all this activity that is there, and we should consider. Now, despite all these issues, the Colombian Ministry of Commerce, Industry, and Tourism is really interested. They have been really involved in the creation and promotion of Colombia as a main destination for this form of tourism, for agritourism. And they made a series of studies supported by USAID and the National Du Bon Society. They calculate that if birding succeeds in the frame of the post-agreement era, it will generate a significant income. We are talking about in a period of time of a decade, more than 100,000 visitors, between 100,000 and 200,000. Generating an approximate income of $47 million annually. The calculation is 7,500 new jobs. However, if these jobs are really impacting local communities, it's an issue that we still need to consider. And the model that the government has been implementing with this is a series of alliances through the ministry, basically promoting Colombia as a destination. At this point, they have 35 certified operators. These operators range from the Audubon Society, which is huge, to local touristic companies, as well as little business led by local people. However, around the 85% of all these businesses are owned by people that is not living in the areas affected by the conflict. Is basically people living in cities that has a guide, a bilingual guide, in many cases biologists, who travel to those areas and have some contact with locals. Then also the distribution of this income is not clear if it is evenly distributed at this point, unfortunately. However, for Colombia, still are quite attractive to models, and is the models that are inspiring this model of agritouristic entrepreneurship in Colombia. One is Rwanda. In Rwanda today, the mountain gorillas tourism, it's the largest foreign exchange earner in the frame of the post-conflict in Rwanda. And in Peru, the number of bird watching tourists doubled, grew twice from 2012 to 2013, and produced an annual income over $8 million per year. A way in which Colombia is promoting this is also participating actively on eBird. The Colombian government is aware that eBird is a community that reach a global scope, and eBirders usually choose their destinations based on the number of species registered in a particular location. The way in which Colombia has been doing that during the last years has been participating in what is known as the Global Big Day. The Global Big Day is a day of bird watching. It's a kind of World Cup logic. It's divided on local national teams, and the teams that register the higher number of species is the winner. In the last 3 years, in 2017, 18, and 19, Colombia has been the winner in both in number of checklists completed as well as in number of species registered. We can notice that there is a growth even in the number of species, and that is promoting the country as a hot spot, as they call themselves, destination. This accomplishment has been possible because the participation of Colombia in the Global Big Day involves the participation of local birders, but also institutions like even the Colombian Air Force and the Ministry of Tourism, and of course all this network of operators that I mentioned before. As part of this, and considering some of the challenges, Colombia has been developing some trails. One of the most successful trails indeed is located in the north of the country, around the Sierra Nevada and the Guajira, highly biodiverse areas. And as a result of this was made a series of documentaries called The Birders. I want to show you the intro of the birders and the demo just to give you an idea of how operates this model.
Being a bird guide in Colombia is absolutely crazy. We are basically living the Victorian times of exploration. You can choose a remote corner of the country and almost for sure you're going to find surprises.
And as we can notice here, it is still this notion that biodiversity is a commodity. It's a commodity that can fit in this logic of neo-extractivism. And as explained by Arturo Escobar, it's a logic that capitalizes nature, or treats nature as a commodity, making possible the management of non-human beings and ecosystem, which is central for discourses of sustainable development. And it's a narrative that the Colombian government has embraced in a quite aggressive way during the last 3 governments, I will say even 4, in following the ideas of the UN, especially that biodiversity deserves our attention because biodiversity supports human activities and supports human economy, and different forms of that. Now, how it is possible to consider that separation between humans and non-humans and try to reconnect those worlds of nature and culture some way, somehow? And the answer is yes, maybe listening a little bit and paying attention about how people in those regions listen to these birds and interact with these birds, and how they construct even cultural features based on the relationship with these birds. I want to return here to Al Suelo desde el Viento, the piece by Ana Maria Romano, and use this spectrogram as an example. These areas here with the yellow circles are areas in which you will listen to the birds. As you can notice, those sounds of birds are connecting different layers of sounds that are superimposed, electroacoustic sounds. And then the call of the birds becomes a structural feature connecting all these different sonic interventions that that the author, the artist is making. Let's listen to it a little bit. It was that structural role probably what called my attention to that particular sound. Uh, I will say that it was quite interesting and definitely was informed by my listening preferences. Other people listening to this piece will have a different experience of sound. But it is interesting because that is precisely what Ana Maria Romano is trying to do. Ana Maria Romano uses the soundscape in a line really informed and influenced by the work of Hildegard Westerkamp, and particularly thinking the possibilities that listening can have as an experience that is disrupting, that disrupts your quotidian life, your daily life, by introducing sounds that probably you are not aware of, but for sure are part of your aural world. And by doing that, it is showing a series of relations between humans and non-humans that invite us to consider natural, social, and cultural factors that affect how we construct that experience of listening. Definitely, this is, as Stephen Feld will suggest, a listening that in my case, and this is a kind of autoethnography, it is based on affect. I have an affective connection, an affective memory with this particular bird based on familiarity instead of rarity. Then that connection shows a particular relation between that non-human being and this human being. However, what happens when you project that to the sphere of the collective experience, not just a listening that is based in a subjective, in an individual preference? In this case appears this Cliqui del Paro. This song was a song that Edson Belandia, an artist known in Colombia for his political positions and use of carranga music, traditional music from Santander and Boyacá, to protest and make us a critique of the political issues and social issues happening. Made in the middle of the national strike that started as a protest against some politics of the government that unfortunately led to a quite violent repression after some vandalic acts in some cities. And as a result, in several cities was declared curfew on the night of the strike. The result was quite interesting. People was trying to take control over the protest and expressing that this is a peaceful protest and we need to be listened by the government. And many people suddenly did something known as a cacerolazo, which was basically that everyone was hitting their pants through the windows and making noise. I will say a quite eloquent use of noise and making noise in order to be listened by an authority that seems to be far and disconnected with the reality of the people protesting. What is interesting is that the son of Belandia connected this notion of protest with another quite powerful symbolic representation of the Sirirí, and is the Sirirí as a symbol of resistance. As we can notice in the introduction here, starts with a rhythmic cell of basically 3/8, pa pa pa, and even has an accent in the last 8, and that is later imitated by the pans. Let's listen a little bit of that.
Amorcito, yo te quiero, esto vos lo tienes claro. Nos pillamos en la clase, nos flechamos en el paro. Clic, 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 clic. Qué bueno.
Clic 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 is the name that this bird receives in Santander and Boyacá, indeed. And you will notice some similarities in these names. Clic clic clic, Sirirí, bien te vi, bien te fue, are that rhythmic cell ta 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 is there because the names are basically onomatopoeias of the call of this bird. Then it's an oral representation of that. What is interesting about that is what I interviewed Edson Belandi about this song. He wasn't aware of that relation with the bird. Basically, he said the following words. Here in Santander and Boyacá, two underground departments in northwest Colombia, the term Sirirí refers to an annoying person. It's a term so ingrained in the local popular culture that I decided to use it to encourage the people to join the march while giving to the song the charm that provides the use of a colloquial expression used in our daily lives. Besides, the idea of the song was to put a Sirirí. This is to annoy the Colombian government. However, I just learned recently that the Sirirí is a bird that lives in this region and fully understands the origin of this term. Indeed, the relationship between the Sirirí and the humans here and the use of the Sirirí as a symbol of annoying perseverance is a result of the behavior that I show at the beginning of this presentation. As this bird doesn't fear bigger birds that enter to their territory and they attack them relentlessly, it seems like a fragile bird can be a perfect symbol of resistance because it's perseverant in the defense of this territory. And it's related with many issues that are happening now in Colombia in the perspective of the post-agreement. Indeed, what is interesting here is that it's so ingrained as a symbol and sonically is so ingrained in Colombian culture in these regions, which is not an indigenous culture, which is where usually developed the idea of acoustemology. It is a mestizo, it's a rural or semi-rural and even urban communities. Then it's quite different. And the Sirirí then became a symbol of resistance among some movements of victims. A poster child of this is Fabiola Lalinde and the Operation Sirirí, like the Operation Sirirí. We can see her here with the Sirirí holding. Well, Ms. Lalinde lost her son Fernando in 1984. He was a student of sociology in the Universidad de Antioquia, but also was a militant of the guerrilla. In 1984, the guerrilla was the Ejército Popular de Liberación was in a truce with the Colombian government in the middle of a conversation of peace, but he somewhat disappeared in an illegal operation by the army violating the truce. She started to look for her son and began something called the Operation Sirirí, collecting information, collecting data, gathering data. She decided that this bird would be the symbol of her struggle and the struggle of her family for the truth and the justice, because she remembered watching this bird doing that and defending the territory and defending the nest against big birds. In addition, some friends of Fernando added to that the bird is a perfect symbol because the birds identifying in the heraldics of the army or the battalions fighting with the guerrillas on that time were rapacious. Harpies, eagles, falcons. Then why not? This is amazing. It was an amazing accomplishment. During 30 years, they collected press clippings, photographs, witness accounts, and finally, they won the recognition of the responsibility by the Colombian government. The first step was in 1988, when the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights of the OIS found guilty the Colombian government, and it took until 2013 when finally the government accepted the responsibility, especially due to the new environment around, challenging this past and facing this past, which unfortunately has been under scrutiny and probably changing for the worst under the actual political environment in the country. Now, what we have here is that the Sirirí then is not just a bird. It is quite different from an entrance in a live list that could have a birder on his mind. For many Colombians, the Sirirí or Cli is what Philippe de Scola defines as a totem. A totem is basically a sign used to establish models that explain the social relationships between humans, often through the transference of animal behaviors that metaphorically exemplify human behaviors and values, in this case, resistance, perseverance, in such a mode of identification that differences between species become models of social distinction, establishing a metaphorical relationship between nature and culture marked by the continuity between human and non-human forms of materiality and interiority. This is not the only way in which Colombians establish a relationship with this bird. As I mentioned before, the Sirirí is a quite resilient species. Siriris also live around humans, and farmers know that Siriris, as other members of the family Tyrannidae, eat insects, a lot of harmful insects. And if you travel around some areas in Colombia, particularly in the Andes, you will see this tree planted around houses and cropping areas. The name of the tree is Yarumo, or Yarumo Blanco. And it's a tree that in many cases is planted not just because it's beautiful. When you start to talk with some of these farmers, they explain you that, oh, the thing is, the seeds of this tree are really, birds seems to like a lot those seeds. And we really want to have around Siriris because they are allies. They are good to control like harmful bugs that can destroy our crops. Then we want them around. It's a way to attract them. It's also a way to pay for their service. Then we have a relationship that is not just based in this form of representation of a totem, but also based on retribution. And that has an unsuspected effect in the ecosystem and the preservation of the ecosystem. In places where this practice is extended, these trees connect different forested areas that were isolated in other way. It was in another manner, and that creates a kind of corridor connecting islands of forest, basically. And that facilitates and is crucial for a species that, interestingly, can be a species that could attract a birder, like the Tucaneta esmeralda, and particularly the rare or endemic red-bellied grackle. Then, what we have here is a traditional practice based in a relationship between humans and non-humans that connects nature and culture and has an impact that sustains an ecological matrix, what Yvette Perfecto and her team on the University of Michigan will describe as an ecological matrix, then creating the proper conditions to sustain that. There are other practices that also do that. For instance, planting trees to offer shadow to the coffee crops. Those trees, as shown some studies made, interestingly, using data from eBird. Those birds that migrate from the south to the US to Central America, for instance, the number of individuals of many species and the size of several populations reduced dramatically when coffee crops and coffee plantations were technified by introducing new varieties of coffee that resisted the sunlight, were better resistant to sunlight, and to increase the production of coffee. Many of these trees that providing shadow were basically taken down. Then I want to finish with this short conclusion and this short reflection, and is how space and human and non-humans can be connected. We have two different ways to, and today we saw two different ways to connect this. The humans and the birds, the non-humans in this case. Basically, we have the birds and the songs that can have a meaning, can be meaningful, and can be established as something else. Of course, through a listening and the introduction of listening practices and learning listening practices and being aware of those listening practices that many times are the part of the cultural patrimony of an heritage of these local communities that many times are ignored within these big projects of ecotourism, or just took as cheap labor. And that is possible because there's an oral sphere connecting them. An oral sphere that facilitates production of meaning and the transformation of that space into a place, and that establishes a meaningful relation between human, non-humans, culture, and nature. Then why should we listen to the Sirirí? Why should we listen to the ways in which people listen to the Sirirí and what we could learn about that? It is a question that is still in the air. It's still in the air how we can be more critical about the possibilities of the commodification of biodiversity and the commodification of local cultures within the frame of the post-agreement, and who are distributed those benefits, and if those benefits are really meaning the same, and the notion of progress that those benefits are introducing and development are indeed the same that are interested in which the communities are interested. Then yes, that's basically my short talk for today. Thank you so much. If we have some time to a conversation of questions, those will be welcome.
Thank you, Juanfe. That was great. And so I think that for some of you, you might be on mute automatically by design. But please be sure to also share your questions or observations on the group chat piece that you should have on your right side, on the right side of your screen, depending on the platform that you're using. Let me make an observation, if I may. One of the things that struck me was how, you know, you make this connection between, you know, the song, the rhythm of the song, click, 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 and Sirirí, and then the connection to how it is, you know, the Sirirí and those northern parts of Colombia are also known as sort of annoying. And you know, you made that connection, but then I'm wondering if there's something else to that rhythm that you might find cross-culturally.
Yes. Okay. Yes. If I understood your question, Manuel, I think that what is happening here, it is quite interesting. As you know, as the call of the city is quite conspicuous. It calls the attention of many people. And it's part of the sonic memory of many Colombians because it is an issue of familiarity too. Yes, it's it's not based on rarity, as I explained later before. It's based on these relations of proximity between birds and humans, and this sense of proximity and presence. And is this observation, this familiarity, what allows this kind of identification, which becomes part of the aural sphere that I was mentioning before. I think that the use in the song is quite interesting because, the bird as representation disappears, but the sound stays. And the sound then becomes an icon, an index of something else. But for many of us that listen to the song for the first time, indeed, I didn't discover the song by myself. It was a friend who lives in Texas who sent me the video, and hey, this is the bird that we talked about some weeks before, right? He had this connection, he's Colombian too, and he had this connection with the bird. What is interesting is Edson Belandia at the beginning wasn't aware of that. It became later. Then the question here is, how our listening preferences are informed by these personal experiences, as well as for cultural codes that we share as insiders of a given culture.
Right, but I'm wondering if there are, of course, the Sirirí is not just in one place in the world, not just one country, I should say. It's
oh, no.
Right, but if there are birds in other continents that might have a similar call that might be used in similar ways, sort of like the annoying.
That is an interesting
rhythmic
thing. I think that I know about some cases, but basically in this hemisphere, I know, for instance, that in Puerto Rico, as far as I have been talking with some colleagues in Puerto Rico, there was a bird that it resembled the city. Was the first bird that returned after the hurricane, and it appeared in the protest a year ago in the wave of protest. Then it seems like birds. The thing about birds is birds are conspicuous within the natural world because they are, they are colorful, they are attractive, they have a sonic persona, but also they are quite easy to watch, right? Then it is, I think that they are perfect for that reason to be transformed into a totem. I will say that here in the US, you have a couple of examples. One is the symbol of the eagle, or the bald eagle, right? What symbolizes the bald eagle to the US as US. But also, for instance, the crow, which is the whole, is the whole contrary thing. And I'm wondering if there are other cases, but it's something that honestly deserves more attention, of course.
Yeah, and where I was going with the question, and by the way, everybody, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation with Juanfe. I just wanted to follow up on the first question, but where I was actually trying to get at is more along the lines of, the CDD, all these, as you say, conspicuous, is a conspicuous bird, but there are other conspicuous birds around the world that maybe, when you're new to the place, you find them charming. But if you're trying to do something, or if you're just in your routine in the field or at home and your window's open, then the constant call, right? There's these birds that have a constant call, and it's rhythmic and it's very similar all the time. And it can get annoying, right? Because you can't control it. It's totally outside of your sphere. And whereas there are other birds that we might call more exotic, that are rare, and that we might seek out the song for, or the birds that maybe only sing in the morning at certain times, or only at certain times of the year, that we sort of idealize, and we have a different role for them. So I thought that was quite a nice analogy with the protest. because it is something I can't, well, you can try and control, and many people have tried to control protests brutally throughout history. But you know, it's something that is there to remind you that there's something that's not right. Whereas the Sirirí, not necessarily. I mean, they're just living their lives, right?
And I think that is also related with that video that I showed at the beginning, when the bird, you know, they attacked literally once and again, these hawks, these big, like, birds that enter to the territory. Then that is also a part of that, I think. So I think that someone rose the hand. Is Sebastian? Yeah, Sebastian Cuellar, great. Oh, Daniel. Indeed, Daniel was the person who shared with me the video of Edson Belandia. Then thank you, Daniel. Okay, then that's an interesting question. Daniel is asking me if I think this binary nature versus culture as dynamic or as a separate spheres. I think that they operate in different ways in each model. In agritourism, you have a commodification between the human and non-human world. It's a process of commodification connecting them. Then that separation is necessary, you know, in order to have this non-human world as a commodity that inserted in this logic of you know, economic activities and ecotourism. Then that operates in a quite separate sphere. Which is interesting about the experience, you know, the second section, is that you start to notice that they not as separate as they seem when you start to consider the experience, the local experience, and the perspective of the insider who lives around that bird, who coexists in a space with that bird. Then it is quite interesting to notice that there is a series of acoustic ensembles, just as you're mentioning, that are connecting these two spheres and are bridging that. And I think that is that, you know, it also shows why exists this difference between how we establish the value of non-living humans, and how this value changes from one species to another one, or a series of values that we add. Then that's something that we should consider. Okay, I have that Jason also had a commentary. Okay. Oh, you all the word chirp as a verb? Oh, I didn't know that. I would love to know more about that, Jason, about the chirp. Yes, and I think that it is a quite useful commentary. Thank you so much, Jason. Maria. Okay, thank you. Okay, the calls that you have on eBird, you can download them, you can listen to them in your app, as well as you can upload them. Those calls, which is interesting and is part, you know, it's a part that is going in the future in this project. Those calls are indeed, you know, are part of a new economy now. Those recordings are goods that are part of a market, and they are used in different ways. One is to attract, but also to repel the birds. Is something that you can notice with crows here in many campuses in the U.S. For instance, in Pittsburgh, in Michigan. I think that in West Virginia also is happening, and Bloomington, Indiana. There's significant migration of crows to those campuses on winter, and in order to repel them, the calls of those birds are playback is made in some areas in order to you know, to discourage them to be there. Then there are different companies doing that. It's not just the birds; it's a whole market. Thanks for your talk. I learned so much, and also discovering valuable tools for analyzing relationship between different classes of culture, human and non-human. Thank you so much, Fernando. I appreciate a lot your comment. It's really welcome. Yes, I think that you know, what I am interested is that we start to challenge those boundaries. Like part of the modernity and the project of modernity that we inherited is this separation between the culture and the non-human world. Is something that authors like Ana Maria Ochoa have explored on her work, how we build this difference. And maybe, you know, I think that the crisis in terms of environmental ecological crisis that we have experiencing, it's requiring that we, you know, challenge those boundaries and start to establish those connections. And maybe, again, I think that here listening is not just a symbolic gesture, but also a strategic survivance. Start to listen to how these different communities, you know, connect this human and non-human worlds in different ways. Sebastian, if you want to ask, you will be welcome.
Ah, okay. Hi, Juan. How are you?
Fine, Sebastian. How are you?
Fine, thank you. This is a wonderful talk, and I just wanted to add some commentaries about the Sirirí. You
Yes.
know, and you describe it as, you know, as a way of victims of violence of give meaning to their struggle. You know, and the Operation Sirirí that you mentioned, that is, you know, first embodied by Fabiola Lalinde, is now part of almost all the repertoires of struggling against the state. And that's basically the notion of Sirirí, of pushing and pushing up and pushing against the state and the impunity.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost interesting to have in mind that in most of the cases of the people who are struggling for, you know, the restoration of citizenship, especially those who are victims of enforced disappearance, almost all organizations of human rights talk about the Operation Sirirí, and especially because it also has a very maternal, you know, motherhood connotation of, you know, protecting the kids, protecting, you know, and as I think that you are aware, the Sirirí is a very aggressive species that protects its babies, you know, when they're in situation of danger. And also there is another bird that is used, you know, or at least is symbolized in a very similar way in the Llanos Orientales, that is called the tente. And this tente is
about that one.
also a very interesting bird who is very protective, which has with his little birds. And actually there are some groups of theater of victims that are called the tente because they are symbolizing the protection of their disappeared kids or sons or daughters. So I want just to mention those points.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. It's more than welcome. And indeed, I forgot to mention Sebastian at the beginning of this conversation. He was one of these colleagues that, you know, I met here in Pittsburgh, and he contributed a lot with his conversations to the development of this project that I presented today. Then thank you, Sebastian. Yes, and your contribution is more than welcome. Thank you.
Hello.
Hola.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Simon, I can hear you perfectly.
Hello to everyone. I'm talking from Medellin, Colombia. Well, the question that I wrote on the chat, I think you answered a little bit when you were answering the question about human and culture and why we should, you think at this point we should listen to the CDD. But I would like to go back to that question because I think it's the most important part in the center of your talk, you know, why we should listen to other species. And I wanted to talk to because I have a bigger, I don't know how to put it, because when I have been working with this term human and non-human, and before that it was human and animals, then I found that it's still very binary, you know?
Mhm.
And I prefer nowadays to use the term human and other species. And I would like to know what is your opinion about that change on our language, because I saw that your talk was very, very cautious about the language in the post-agreement versus the post-conflict in the beginning of the talk. So I would like to know what do you think about the change of our language, instead of speaking of human and non-human, trying to speak of human and other species, which is still binary, you know. There's no way to get out of that, but it's a little bit more open. So my two questions, I'm sorry, is that I would like to know at this point why we should listen to the Sirirí, in your opinion and in your knowledge. And the second one is the change of language in the human versus non-human and the human and other species.
Okay, thank you for your questions, Simon. I will start with your second question, which is probably, it's really challenging, I must confess. And yes, it's an issue that I have considered, like this binary human, non-human. Indeed, I will rather do something that, you know, as much as I work in this project, I am starting to consider that I should try to do something as the Kogis, you know, the Caraba of the Sierra, that for them, the difference between animal and human is not that. For them, an animal is a human with a different, like wearing a different clothes, basically. But, you know, the reduction to species for me is problematic for one reason. And it's like, you know, when you mention non-human, the universe is wider. You know, non-human is not just living beings. You know, it's not just animals and plants, which is within the realm of species, but extends that to other things. And I think that those other things are also things that we should consider, you know, because are part of the ecosystem. Then what about the relationship with waters? And you know that, you know, look what happened with Ituango, for instance, all the discussion about the river and the Cauca River recently in Colombia. I know that Manuel Romano also knows a lot about this because he worked for a while in this kind of, you know, of environments about building dams. Then what happens with the water, for instance, right? How enters the water in this discussion if we reduce that just to species? Then what is that? That's why I'm trying to, you know, I know the binary is still there. I know that it's quite problematic, but at the same time, I am trying to, you know, to reconfigure that to be more inclusive. But I agree completely with you in that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Do you want to add something, Simon?
Well, I have think about that, or just to say humans, other species, and other entities. So we can include the other stuff that we don't think is alive. But I still agree with you. It's not that simple. It
is quite difficult. I think that a smart move will should try to do what the people from the Sierra does. The problem is, you know, I'm still struggling how to translate that to this other universe, which is the you know, this analysis that we are doing.
I like the word other though, because that includes me in a way.
Yeah. I agree with you with that. Thank you for that, Simon.
Thanks to you. It was a very interesting talk.
And answering your first question regarding the, you know, why should we listen to the Sirirí? I think that is not just listen to the Sirirí, but also learn how other people learn to listen to the Sirirí. And how other people establishes the relationship with that other world around them through listening to this. And what can we learn of that, you know, listening preferences of that, all that universe that is built through those listening preferences. I think that that's the center of this discussion and why we should listen to that.
If I might, if there are other questions, of course, they're welcome. We might have time for one or two more. But I would also request that anybody who is listening or participating or watching, streaming, etc., if you would be so kind as to send us a chat or a notification about where you're participating from, I would appreciate it very much if you might. And as I said, we might have time for one or two more questions. if anybody has any.
I would love to, you know, this is still a project that is ongoing. You know, any conversation is really, really welcome. And thank you so much for being here today, all of you. It was wonderful to share this.
Well, I will take the opportunity to thank you, Juanfe, very much for your kindness and your time and your energy in putting this together. It goes without saying that we are thrilled every time that you are able to share some time in your ideas with us. So it's really fortunate that we're also able to share them with our broader community, and especially when it's topics that are so important and that we might have more time to appreciate in these days when we can listen more to the song of the birds and nature around us.
Before finishing, I want to thank again the Center for Latin American Studies and all the staff. And also, before I forget it, I have deep gratitude with Ana Maria Romano and Edson Belandia, who were really open to have a conversation with me, talk about their work, and share their work with me. I truly appreciate that. And thank you. You know, it won't be possible, all this that I presented today, without their support. Then thanks to them too.
Right. And well, thank you very much. I wish you all well. Everybody take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And until next time, I will say goodbye for now.